The Hoarder Grandma Who Hid a Painful Secret. Part 1. The Call. The phone call came on a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of grey November day when the sky pressed down like a wet blanket and the cold seeped through even the thickest sweater. Sarah Mitchell was at her desk, reviewing architectural plans for a new office building downtown, when her phone vibrated against the polished wood surface. "Unknown number" flashed across the screen. She almost didn't answer. These days, unknown numbers usually meant spam calls about extended car warranties or suspicious packages that needed immediate attention. But something made her pause, some inexplicable instinct, and she pressed the green button. "Hello? Is this Sarah Mitchell?" The voice was professional, measured, with the practiced gentleness of someone who delivered bad news for a living. "Yes, this is she. Ms. Mitchell? This is Detective Chen from the Riverside Police Department. I'm calling regarding your grandmother, Margaret Sullivan." Sarah's breath caught. She hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in almost 15 years. Margaret Sullivan, Grandma Maggie, the woman who had raised her from age 6 to 11, who had taught her to bake apple pies and told her stories about the stars, who had hummed old folk songs while braiding her hair. The woman Sarah had been forced to leave behind when social services deemed her home unsafe. Is she all right?" Sarah managed to ask, though her hands had begun to tremble. "I'm afraid your grandmother passed away 3 days ago. Natural causes, it appears. She was found by a neighbor who noticed her mail piling up. I'm very sorry for your loss." The words hit Sarah like physical blows. Dead. 3 days ago. Found by a neighbor. She tried to process the information, but her mind kept snagging on the details. 3 days. Had Grandma Maggie been alone? Had she been scared? Had she called out for anyone? "Ms. Mitchell, are you still there?" "Yes, I'm here." Sarah pressed her palm against her forehead, willing herself to focus. "I'm sorry, this is just unexpected." "I understand. The reason I'm calling is that you're listed as her only living relative. Her property needs to be dealt with, and there are some decisions that need to be made regarding her estate and, well, the condition of the home." The condition of the home. Sarah knew exactly what that meant. Even 15 years ago, when she'd been taken away at age 11, the house had been deteriorating. Mountains of newspapers stacked against walls, narrow pathways winding through forests of belongings, every surface covered with collections of things Grandma Maggie couldn't bear to part with. Sarah had nightmares sometimes about being buried under those towers of memories, suffocating under the weight of her grandmother's inability to let go. "I understand," Sarah said quietly. "When do you need me there?" "As soon as possible would be best. There are some time-sensitive matters to address." Sarah looked at her calendar, at the meetings and site visits scheduled for the rest of the week, at the carefully organized life she'd built for herself. Everything in her apartment had a place. Everything was clean, minimal, ordered. She'd spent years creating the opposite of the chaos she'd grown up in. "I can be there by Friday," she heard herself say. "That would be fine. I'll email you the details. Again, I'm very sorry for your loss." After the call ended, Sarah sat motionless at her desk for a long moment, staring at the architectural plans in front of her, without really seeing them. Lines and measurements blurred together as her vision swam with unexpected tears. She hadn't seen Grandma Maggie in 15 years, hadn't called, hadn't written. After she'd been placed with her Aunt Linda and Uncle Robert, she'd been so angry, so hurt by the fact that her grandmother had chosen her things over her granddaughter. The social worker's words still echoed in her memory. "Your grandmother is sick, Sarah. She loves you, but she can't take care of you properly. You deserve a safe, clean home." Sarah had tried to understand, had tried to forgive, but every time she thought about calling, about reaching out, the hurt would surge back. What if Grandma Maggie had forgotten about her? What if the house was even worse now? What if Sarah discovered that her grandmother really had loved her collection of broken clocks and yellowed magazines more than she'd loved her only grandchild? So Sarah had stayed away. She'd built her walls just like Grandma Maggie had built hers, except Sarah's were emotional rather than physical. And now It was too late. No more chances for reconciliation. No more opportunities to understand. No more possibility of finding out why her grandmother had been the way she was. Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and pulled up her email, beginning to compose a message to her boss about a family emergency. As she typed, her mind drifted back to those 5 years she'd lived with Grandma Maggie after her parents had died in a car accident. Despite the clutter, despite the maze-like conditions, there had been love there. She remembered that now, reluctantly. The way Grandma Maggie would clear a space at the kitchen table every evening for dinner, insisting they eat together. The way she'd read aloud from old storybooks, her voice soft and melodic. The way she'd held Sarah when the nightmares came, rocking her and singing until the memories of screeching tires and sirens faded. But Sarah also remembered the arguments with social workers, the concerned visits from teachers when Sarah showed up to school in clothes that weren't quite clean, the shame of never being able to invite friends over because there was nowhere to sit, nowhere to play. She remembered the final inspection that had led to her removal, the horror on the social worker's face as she documented room after room of hoarded belongings. By the time Sarah left work that evening, her weekend bag was already packed in her mind. Practical clothes for sorting through a lifetime of accumulated possessions, garbage bags, labels, cleaning supplies. She'd approached this the way she approached everything now, methodically, systematically, without letting emotion cloud her judgment. But as she drove home through the grey November drizzle, Sarah couldn't quite shake the image of her grandmother as she'd last seen her. Grandma Maggie, standing on the porch of that crumbling house, tears streaming down her weathered face, reaching out toward the car that was taking Sarah away. "I'll fix it," she'd been calling. "I promise I'll fix it. Please don't take her. Please." Sarah had turned away, had refused to look back. She'd been so angry, so hurt, so convinced that if her grandmother really loved her, she would have chosen differently. Now, 15 years later, Sarah wondered if she'd been wrong about everything. Part 2. The house Sarah pulled up in front of 2847 Maple Street, just as the weak November sun was beginning to break through the morning clouds. She sat in her rental car for a long moment, hands gripping the steering wheel, staring at the house that had once been her whole world. It looked smaller than she remembered, smaller and infinitely sadder. The white paint had given way to a tired grey, peeling in long strips that hung like shedskin. The porch sagged in the middle, and several of the windows were covered with sheets or newspapers from the inside. The yard was overgrown, weeds claiming territory that had once been carefully tended flower beds. An ancient oak tree still dominated the front yard, its bare branches reaching toward the sky like grasping fingers. Detective Chen was waiting on the porch, a man in his 40s with kind eyes and the patient demeanor of someone who'd seen too much of humanity's struggles. He stood when Sarah got out of the car, offering a small, sympathetic smile. "Ms. Mitchell, I'm Detective Chen. Thank you for coming so quickly. Please, call me Sarah." She shook his hand, noting the firmness of his grip, the way his eyes assessed her with professional curiosity. "How bad is it?" He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "I've seen worse, but I want to prepare you. It's significant. Your grandmother was living in only a small portion of the house. Most of the rooms are inaccessible." Sarah nodded, steeling herself. "I grew up here. I know what to expect." But she didn't. She really didn't. Detective Chen unlocked the front door with a key he'd obtained from the property management company, and the smell hit Sarah like a wall. It wasn't the smell of rot or death, thankfully, but a thick, musty odor of paper and dust and time, of things shut away from air and light for far too long. Underneath it was something else, something that tugged at Sarah's memory, lavender and vanilla, the scent of her grandmother's favorite soap. The detective pushed the door open as far as it would go, which was only about 18 inches. Beyond the narrow opening, Sarah could see stacks of newspapers and magazines reaching nearly to the ceiling, creating a canyon barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. The main path leads to the kitchen and what appears to be a small sitting room, Detective Chen explained. "That's where your grandmother was found. It seemed she'd made a sort of nest there where she ate and slept. The rest of the house, he gestured vaguely. We haven't been able to access most of it. I've called in a professional hoarding remediation company to assess the situation, but I wanted you to see it first. Sarah took a deep breath and stepped through the door. The path was narrower than she remembered, the walls of accumulated possessions higher. She had to turn sideways in places, her jacket brushing against newspapers from decades past. Headline fragments caught her eye as she moved through the dim passage. Man walks on moon, Berlin wall falls, new millennium arrives. Her grandmother had kept everything, preserving the march of history in yellowing newsprint. But it wasn't just newspapers. As Sarah's eyes adjusted to the dimness, most of the windows were blocked. She began to see the incredible variety of objects crammed into every available space. Stacks of magazines, yes, but also boxes of books, bags of yarn, piles of fabric, collections of kitchen utensils, mountains of mail both opened and unopened, plastic containers filled with buttons and ribbons and threads of every color. There were dolls with dusty glass eyes staring out from precarious perches, clocks of every size and description, none showing the correct time, and what appeared to be at least a dozen vacuum cleaners in various states of disassembly. The path opened into the kitchen, and Sarah had to stifle a gasp. The room was perhaps the most heartbreaking thing she'd seen yet, because it showed so clearly her grandmother's struggle to maintain some semblance of normal life amid the chaos. The small table where they'd once eaten dinner together had been cleared, or rather, a small corner of it had been cleared. A single plate sat there, beside a single cup and a single set of utensils, all clean. The rest of the table was buried under papers and boxes. One burner on the stove was accessible, the others covered with pots and pans. The refrigerator door could open only part way, blocked by more stacks. When Sarah peered inside, she saw it was nearly empty. Some condiments, a carton of milk, a few eggs. Her grandmother had been eating very simply, it seemed, out of necessity, because there was no room to cook properly, nowhere to store fresh food. "Through here is the sitting room," Detective Chen said quietly, pointing to a doorway hung with long strands of colored beads that clicked softly in the slight draft. Sarah pushed through the beads and stopped. This was where her grandmother had died, where she'd spent her final years, maybe her final decades. The room was small, carved out of the chaos like a cave in a mountain. A threadbare armchair faced an old television set that perched atop a tower of boxes. A sleeping bag was spread on the floor beside the chair, with a pillow and a quilt that Sarah recognized. She'd slept under that quilt herself as a child, had traced the pattern of interlocking rings with her small fingers while Grandma Maggie told her stories. The walls visible in this small space were covered with photographs, hundreds of them, tacked and taped and pinned in overlapping layers. Sarah moved closer, her breath catching as she recognized the faces looking back at her. Her parents, young and smiling on their wedding day. Her father as a boy, gap-toothed and grinning. Her mother pregnant, one hand on her swollen belly. And Sarah herself, at every age from newborn to 11 years old. Sarah blowing out birthday candles. Sarah holding up a drawing she'd made. Sarah with missing front teeth. Sarah on her first day of school. There was even a more recent photo, and Sarah realized with a shock that her grandmother must have gotten it somehow from Aunt Linda. It was from Sarah's college graduation, cap and gown, and proud smile. How had Grandma Maggie gotten this? Had she reached out? Had she been following Sarah's life all these years? "She loved you very much," Detective Chen said softly from behind her. "That much is clear." Sarah couldn't speak. Tears blurred her vision as she looked at the shrine her grandmother had created. All these photos, preserved and displayed in this tiny cleared space, looked at every day by a lonely old woman who couldn't let go of anything, especially not the memory of the granddaughter who'd been taken away. "There's something else," Detective Chen said. He moved to a small side table next to the armchair, one of the few flat surfaces in the entire visible house. "I found these and thought you should see them." He handed Sarah a stack of envelopes, perhaps 50 or 60 of them. They were all addressed to Sarah, care of her aunt and uncle's address. They were all stamped and sealed, ready to mail. They were all unopened, and when Sarah looked at the postmark dates, she understood why. These letters had never been sent. Each one was dated, one per month for the last 15 years, from the month after Sarah had left until just 2 weeks before her grandmother's death. 15 years of unsent letters, of words her grandmother had written, but never had the courage to send. "May I?" Sarah asked, holding up one of the envelopes with shaking hands. Detective Chen nodded. "Everything here is yours now. I'll give you some privacy. Take your time. I'll be outside if you need anything." After he left, Sarah sank into her grandmother's armchair, the smell of lavender and vanilla and age surrounding her. She chose the oldest letter first, the one dated December 2010, just weeks after she'd been taken away. With trembling fingers, she opened the envelope and unfolded the paper inside. Her grandmother's handwriting was still firm and clear then, though it would become shakier in later letters. "My dearest Sarah," it began, "I hope this letter finds you well and happy in your new home. I know you must be angry with me, and you have every right to be. I failed you, my darling girl. I failed you in the most fundamental way a guardian can fail a child. I want to explain, though I'm not sure I can ever make you understand. But I need to try, even if you never read these words, even if you hate me forever. It started when your grandfather died, 30 years ago. I thought I was fine at first. People brought casseroles and sympathy, and I nodded and smiled and thanked them, and then they left me alone with the silence. Your father was grown and gone by then, starting his own life, and suddenly the house was so empty, so terribly empty. I started keeping things to fill the void. The newspaper, because James always read the paper over breakfast, and I couldn't bear to throw away that connection to him. His tools, because his hands had held them. His clothes, because they still smelled like him. And then other things, because each item was a memory, a moment, a piece of life that I couldn't let slip away. It got worse after your father died, after we lost your mother too. I had you then, my precious girl, my second chance to do right. But the grief was so big, Sarah. It filled up all the spaces inside me, and the only way I could manage it was to fill the spaces around me too. Every object was a shield against the emptiness, against the terrible possibility of forgetting. I know that sounds crazy, maybe it is crazy, but in my mind, throwing things away meant letting go, and letting go meant forgetting, and forgetting meant they'd be gone forever, truly gone. You were the one bright light in all that darkness. Your laugh, your questions, your small hand in mine, those things kept me human when I was in danger of disappearing into my own grief. But the house got away from me, and I couldn't fix it, couldn't stop it, couldn't break the patterns that had become like chains. When they took you away, when I saw the disgust on their faces as they looked at what my life had become, I wanted to die. I very nearly did die, Sarah. But then I thought of you, and I thought that maybe if I could fix this, if I could clean up and make the house proper again, they'd let you come home. I tried. God knows I tried. But every time I picked something up to throw away, the panic would come. What if this was important? What if I needed it? What if getting rid of it meant losing another piece of James, of your father, of you? I couldn't breathe. My hands would shake and my heart would race, and I'd have to put it down, had to keep it, had to hold on. So I failed you again, and I will live with that failure until my last breath. I hope you're happy, sweetheart. I hope your new home is clean and bright and full of love. I hope you eat proper meals at a proper table. I hope you have friends over and they have places to sit. I hope you never feel ashamed. I hope someday you can forgive me, though I don't deserve it. I love you more than all the stars in the sky, just like I always told you. Your Grandma Maggie. Sarah's tears fell on the paper, smudging the ink. She read the letter again, and suddenly so many things made sense. Her grandmother hadn't been choosing things over her. She'd been drowning in grief and trauma, in a mental illness she probably didn't even have a name for back then, and she'd been doing her best to survive. Sarah opened another letter, this one from 5 years later. My dearest Sarah, you would be 16 now. I wonder what you look like, whether you're tall or short, whether you kept the dimple in your left cheek when you smile. Do you still love drawing? Do you still ask 1,000 questions about everything? I saw a girl at the grocery store yesterday who looked about your age, and my heart stopped for a moment. It wasn't you, of course. You're miles away, living a life I'll never know. The house is worse now. I can barely move through it. The only places I can access are the kitchen and this little room where I'm writing to you. I sleep here now, in your old quilt. Sometimes I can still catch your scent on it, though I know that's probably my imagination. I tried again to clean. I called one of those numbers on TV, the ones that promise to help people like me. A nice lady came to the door, but when she saw inside, she looked frightened. She said she'd call me with an estimate, but she never did. I don't blame her. I frighten myself sometimes. But I keep your photos close, my darling. I look at them every day and remember your voice, your laugh, the way you used to dance around the kitchen when I made pancakes. I tell myself stories about who you're becoming, the things you're learning, the dreams you're dreaming. I hope they're beautiful dreams, Sarah. I hope your life is everything mine wasn't. I love you more than all the stars in the sky. Your Grandma Maggie. Sarah read letter after letter, watching her grandmother's handwriting deteriorate over the years, watching the guilt and grief and love pour out onto page after page. In some letters, Grandma Maggie wrote about her memories, teaching Sarah to bake, reading her stories, brushing her hair. In others, she wrote about her struggles with the hoarding, her failed attempts to change, her growing isolation as friends and neighbors stopped coming by. In a letter from just 2 years ago, she wrote, I'm 78 now, Sarah. My hands shake and my knees hurt, and I can't remember what day it is half the time, but I remember you. I remember everything about you. I know you're out there somewhere, living your life. I saw a photo. Linda sent it to me, bless her, after I begged her for years. Your college graduation. You were so beautiful, so proud, so accomplished. Everything I hoped you'd become. I'm sorry I wasn't there. I'm sorry I'll never be there for any of the important moments in your life. I'm sorry I let my sickness steal that from both of us. But I want you to know something, darling girl. Even though I wasn't there, even though I failed you in so many ways, you saved me. Those 5 years I had with you, those were the best years of my life after your grandfather died. You gave me purpose and joy and a reason to wake up every morning. You taught me that love could exist even in the middle of chaos. I know now that I'll never send these letters. I'm too ashamed, too afraid of your rejection. I couldn't bear it if you wrote back telling me how much you hate me. This way, I can imagine that maybe you don't. That maybe somewhere in your heart you remember the good times and know that I loved you the best I could. The house will outlast me. All these things I couldn't let go of will be here long after I'm gone. Someone will have to deal with them eventually, probably you, and I'm sorry for that too. Such a burden to leave you. But maybe, if you end up here, going through this mess, maybe you'll find these letters. Maybe you'll understand that every single thing in this house, every newspaper and magazine and broken clock, was me trying desperately to hold on to something, anything, in a world that kept taking away everyone I loved. I couldn't let go, Sarah. Not of your grandfather, not of your parents, not of you. Even when they took you away, I couldn't let go. You've been with me every single day in these photographs, in my memories, in my heart. I hope you've had a good life. I hope it's been full of light and love and laughter. I hope you've been happy. That's all I ever wanted for you. I love you more than all the stars in the sky, now and always. Your Grandma Maggie. By the time Sarah finished reading all the letters, the morning had faded to afternoon. She sat surrounded by her grandmother's words, by 15 years of love and regret and grief, and she finally, truly understood. Her grandmother had been sick. Not morally weak, not selfish, but genuinely deeply ill, with a condition that Sarah now recognized as severe hoarding disorder, likely triggered and exacerbated by profound, unprocessed grief. She'd been trapped in a cycle she couldn't break, loving Sarah desperately but unable to create the environment that love required. And Sarah had spent 15 years angry about it, 15 years refusing to understand, 15 years denying her grandmother even the chance at reconciliation. "I'm so sorry," Sarah whispered to the empty room, to the photographs on the wall, to the ghost of the woman who'd slept here and dreamed here and died here. "I'm so sorry I didn't come back. I'm so sorry you were alone. I'm so sorry I couldn't see past my own hurt to understand yours." But sorry wasn't enough. Sorry didn't change anything. Sorry didn't bring back the lost years or the missed opportunities or the grandmother who would never know that Sarah had finally understood. Will be Part 3, The Discovery. Sarah spent the next week working with the hoarding remediation team, professional cleaners who'd seen hundreds of cases like this one. They were kind and non-judgmental, treating her grandmother's possessions with a respect that Sarah found deeply touching. They understood that every item had a story, even if that story was wrapped in illness and pain. The work was slow and methodical. They had to be careful. Hoarded homes could be structurally unsound, could contain hazards ranging from mold to pest infestations to simple trip hazards. This house, mercifully, was better than many they'd seen. Grandma Maggie had managed to keep vermin out, and there was no rotting food or biological waste. It was just stuff, though there was nothing just about the sheer overwhelming volume of it. Sarah made decisions about what to keep and what to discard, though she found herself unable to throw away as much as she'd expected. Now that she understood the emotional weight behind each item, it felt cruel to simply trash everything. So she kept some newspapers from important dates: her parents' wedding, her own birth, the day her grandfather had died. She kept her grandmother's collection of fabric, thinking she might learn to quilt someday, might create something from the materials Grandma Maggie had saved. She kept photographs and letters and small mementos that told the story of her family. On the 6th day, the team reached what had once been the second bedroom, Sarah's old room. The door had been completely blocked, inaccessible for years. It took hours to clear enough space to even open it. When they finally got the door open, Sarah stepped inside and felt her breath catch. The room was frozen in time. Unlike the rest of the house, which was crammed to the ceiling with accumulated possessions, this room had been preserved almost exactly as Sarah had left it 15 years ago. Her twin bed with its yellow comforter, her small desk with the wobbly leg, her bookshelf with its collection of well-loved children's books, her drawings still tacked to the wall. The only difference was what had been added. Every available surface, the desk, the dresser, the nightstand, was covered with carefully arranged objects, and as Sarah moved closer, she realized what they were: gifts, birthday presents and Christmas presents for every year Sarah had been gone. Each one was wrapped and labeled with a tag that read, "For Sarah," in her grandmother's handwriting, along with the date. Sarah picked up the closest package, her hands trembling. The tag read, "For Sarah's 12th birthday." She carefully unwrapped it, the paper tearing after so many years. Inside was a sketchbook and a set of professional colored pencils, the kind Sarah had dreamed of having as a child, but they'd never been able to afford. The next package was labeled Christmas Age 12. Inside was a book about famous architects and their buildings. How had her grandmother known that Sarah loved to draw buildings, that she dreamed of creating spaces people could live in? Sarah opened package after package, tears streaming down her face. A cookbook for her 16th birthday, a gift card to a bookstore for Christmas when she was 18, a picture frame for her 21st birthday, a journal with, "For my granddaughter, the college graduate," written on the tag. Each present was thoughtful and personal, chosen with care by a woman who hadn't seen Sarah in years, but who had tried so hard to know her anyway. Sarah realized that her grandmother must have gotten information from Aunt Linda, what Sarah was interested in, what she was studying, what milestones she was reaching, and she'd marked each one, even though Sarah wasn't there to celebrate. But there was more. At the back of the room, Sarah found a large cardboard box marked, "For Sarah, Important." Inside were manila folders, each one meticulously labeled and organized in a way that stood in stark contrast to the chaos in the rest of the house. The first folder was labeled College Fund. Inside, Sarah found bank statements documenting a savings account in her name. Her grandmother had been putting money away for her every month, even tiny amounts, $25, $50, sometimes just $10, when that was all she could afford. The account had grown over 15 years to nearly $15,000. Sarah had gone to college on scholarships and loans, had worked 2 jobs to cover her expenses, had graduated with debt she was still paying off, and all the while her grandmother had been saving money for her, money Sarah could have used, money that represented sacrifice and love and hope for a future they'd never share. The next folder was labeled Medical Records, Important. Inside, Sarah found documentation of her grandmother's mental health journey. After Sarah was taken away, Grandma Maggie had sought help. She'd seen doctors, been diagnosed with hoarding disorder and complicated grief disorder, tried medications and therapy. The record showed years of effort, of trying and failing and trying again to get better. There were notes from therapists describing Maggie's goals. Patient wants to clean house so granddaughter can visit. Patient attempting to discard newspapers today experienced severe panic attack. Patient expressing guilt over inability to provide adequate care for granddaughter. Her grandmother had tried. Not successfully, because hoarding disorder is incredibly difficult to treat, especially in someone who'd been living with it for so long. But she'd tried. She'd kept trying, right up until the end. The final folder was the thickest. It was labeled simply, "For Sarah to Understand." Inside were dozens of documents. Her grandfather's death certificate, her father's death certificate, her mother's death certificate, obituaries, funeral programs. But there were also letters from Grandma Maggie's sister, who died when Sarah was a baby, and from Maggie's own mother, documenting a family history of loss and trauma that stretched back generations. Sarah learned things she'd never known. Her grandmother had lost 2 children to miscarriage before having Sarah's father. She'd lost both her parents in a house fire when she was just 25. Her sister had died of cancer after a long, painful illness. Her husband, Sarah's grandfather, had died suddenly of a heart attack while working in his garden. Grandma Maggie had found him there, loss after loss after loss, each one a wound that never properly healed. And then her son and daughter-in-law killed by a drunk driver, leaving behind a 6-year-old girl who needed care and stability and love. Grandma Maggie had tried to give Sarah all those things, even as her own trauma and mental illness made it nearly impossible. At the bottom of the folder was one final letter, this one different from all the others. It was sealed in an envelope marked, "For Sarah, please read last." Sarah opened it with shaking hands. "My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I'm sorry I never had the courage to send the other letters while I was alive. I'm sorry for so many things. But I need you to understand something. The hoarding, the mess, the way I lived, none of that was about not loving you. It was never about not loving you. You were the most precious thing in my life, and losing you was the final break that I couldn't recover from. I know the house will be a burden to you. I know you'll have to spend time and money and emotional energy dealing with the wreckage of my life. I'm sorry for that too. But I want you to know why I saved all of this. Every newspaper holds a date that someone I loved was alive to see. Every magazine contains articles about things that interested your grandfather or your father or you. Every piece of fabric is a dress your grandmother, my mother, might have made, or a quilt I dreamed of sewing for you. Every book is one I hoped we'd read together someday. I was trying to hold on to love, Sarah. I didn't know how to do it any other way. I couldn't keep the people, so I kept the things, and the things became a prison, but I couldn't see that until it was too late. There's money saved for you. It's not much, but it's yours. Maybe it will help with college, or a car, or a home of your own someday. I wanted to give you something better than this house full of ghosts and regrets. I also want you to know that I followed your life as best I could. Linda was kind enough to send me updates and photos. I know you became an architect. I'm so proud of you, sweetheart. You're creating the kinds of clean, beautiful, organized spaces I could never manage in my own life. Maybe that's why you were drawn to it. You needed to build the opposite of what you experienced here. That's good. That's healthy. Don't ever feel guilty about that. But also know this. Despite the chaos, despite the mess, despite everything that went wrong, those 5 years I had with you were filled with real love. When I held you after your nightmares, when I taught you to measure ingredients for pie crust, when I told you stories about the stars, when I braided your hair, that was all real. That love was real. I failed you in many ways, but I never, ever stopped loving you. You were the light in my darkness, and you always will be, even now that I'm gone. I hope you can forgive me someday. I hope you can remember the good parts, along with the bad. I hope you can understand that I was sick, but that sickness didn't erase the love. Live a beautiful life, Sarah. Live it in clean, bright spaces with people who love you well. Live it freely, without the burden of grief and loss that I carried. Live it for both of us. And someday, when you look up at the night sky, remember that I loved you more than all the stars up there, more than I could ever express, more than my illness allowed me to show. You deserved better than what I could give you. But you always, always deserved love, and I gave you all I had. Your Grandma Maggie P.S. Under the floorboard beneath my bed, there's one more thing. It's for you. It's the only thing that really matters. Sarah folded the letter carefully and stood. Her legs felt weak, but she made her way to her grandmother's small sitting room, to the sleeping bag and quilt on the floor. She knelt and felt along the edges of the floorboards until she found one that was loose. She pried it up carefully, heart pounding, and reached into the dark space below. Her fingers touched something soft, cloth wrapped around something solid. She pulled it out. It was a small wooden box, wrapped in a piece of her grandmother's wedding dress. Sarah unwrapped it with reverent care and opened the lid. Inside was a collection of treasures: her grandfather's wedding ring, her father's first baby shoe, her mother's engagement ring, a lock of hair from Sarah's first haircut, tied with a pale blue ribbon, a small drawing Sarah had made when she was 7, a picture of her and Grandma Maggie holding hands under a tree, and at the bottom, a photograph. It showed 4 generations: a young woman, Sarah's great-grandmother, a middle-aged woman, Grandma Maggie as a young mother, Sarah's father as a baby, and in the corner, a tiny notation in her grandmother's handwriting: 4 generations of love. May Sarah be the one who breaks free. Sarah held the box to her chest and wept, deep, shaking sobs that came from a place she'd kept locked away for 15 years. She cried for her grandmother, who died alone, for the little girl she'd been, who hadn't understood, for all the wasted years of silence and stubbornness and pain. But she also cried with a strange sense of relief, because now she understood. Now she knew that she'd been loved, truly and completely loved, even when that love had been buried under mountains of newspapers and magazines, and all the detritus of a life consumed by grief. Part 4. The truth emerges. Over the following days, as the remediation team continued their work, Sarah found more pieces of her grandmother's story. Hidden throughout the house, tucked into books and boxes and drawers, were fragments of a life Sarah had never fully known. She found journals dating back to before Sarah was born, where a younger Maggie wrote about her dreams and hopes, about her love for her husband James, about the joy of finally having a son after the heartbreak of her miscarriages. The early entries were full of life and optimism, written in a confident hand. But after James's death, the entries changed. They became shorter, more fragmented, filled with raw pain. "I can't breathe without him," one entry read. "The house is too quiet. I keep his newspaper on the table, just to feel like he's still here. After Sarah's father died, the entries nearly stopped altogether. Just occasional lines. Sarah asked about her mommy today. I didn't know what to say. Sarah had a nightmare. I held her for an hour. I'm trying so hard to be enough for her, but I don't know if I can. And then, after Sarah was taken away, the house is quiet again. Just me and all these things that don't matter. Nothing matters anymore. Sarah also found evidence of her grandmother's attempts to reach out over the years. Letters drafted to Sarah but never sent. Notes about calling but not having the courage. Birthday cards signed but never mailed. In one drawer, she found a cell phone. A simple flip phone, ancient by today's standards, with Sarah's number, gotten from Aunt Linda, programmed in. The call log showed dozens of attempted calls, each one disconnected within seconds. Her grandmother had tried to call, had dialed the number, but had hung up before it could ring, too afraid of rejection. The most painful discovery came in what had once been the master bedroom. The team had to remove an entire wall's worth of boxes to even access the room. And when they did, Sarah found it preserved almost like a shrine to her grandfather. His clothes still hung in the closet, organized by color and type. His shoes were lined up beneath. His nightstand held his reading glasses, a bookmark still in place in a novel he'd been reading when he died. The bed was made with military precision, the way he'd always insisted on making it. On the dresser was a collection of photographs chronicling their marriage. James and Maggie on their wedding day, young and radiant. James and Maggie with baby in arms, Sarah's father. James and Maggie on vacation, at parties, at family gatherings. James and Maggie grown old together, still holding hands. And beside the photographs was a letter, yellowed with age but preserved in a plastic sleeve. Sarah recognized her grandfather's handwriting. It was addressed to Maggie, dated just a week before he died. My dearest Maggie, I know you laugh at me for writing you letters when we see each other every day, but some things need to be written down, need to be preserved in ink so they can't be forgotten or misremembered. I want you to know that my life with you has been the greatest adventure I could have asked for. You've been my partner, my best friend, my home. Every morning I wake up grateful that you're beside me, and every night I fall asleep counting my blessings, with you at the top of the list. I know we've faced sorrows, the babies we lost, the struggles we endured, but we faced them together, and that made all the difference. You are the strongest, most resilient woman I've ever known. I'm getting older now, Maggie. My heart isn't what it used to be, and I find myself thinking about the future, about what comes after. And I need you to promise me something. When I'm gone, and I will go first, you know I will, because someone needs to be there to greet you when your time comes. I need you to keep living, really living, not just going through the motions, but finding joy and purpose and connection. Don't hold on to me so tight that you can't embrace what comes next. Don't let grief become a prison. Promise me you'll let people in, that you'll keep your life full of light and laughter, that you'll remember me but not at the expense of your own happiness. I've loved you with everything I am, Maggie, and because I love you, I want you to be happy, even when I'm not there to share it. Live fully, my love. Live for both of us. Forever yours, James. Sarah read the letter 3 times, understanding dawning with each reading. Her grandfather had known. Somehow he'd known that Maggie would struggle to let go, that grief might consume her, and he'd tried, in his gentle way, to prevent it. But knowing what you should do and being able to do it are 2 very different things. Maggie had tried to honor his wishes. Sarah could see evidence of that in the early years after his death. But the grief had been too big, the loss too profound, and slowly, inexorably, she turned to the only coping mechanism she could find, holding on to things because she couldn't hold on to people. Sarah took the letter and added it to the growing collection of items she was keeping. These pieces of her grandmother's life, these fragments of love and loss and struggle, were more valuable than anything else in the house. They told a story that needed to be remembered, needed to be understood. Thus Part 5, Understanding and Forgiveness. 3 weeks after arriving at her grandmother's house, Sarah stood in what was now a mostly empty structure. The remediation team had done their work. Tons, literally tons, of newspapers, magazines, and accumulated possessions had been sorted, with some kept and most recycled or disposed of properly. What remained was the skeleton of a house that had once been beautiful. The hardwood floors, once hidden, now gleamed after cleaning. The windows, no longer blocked, let in streams of sunlight that transformed the space. The walls, stripped of their covering of stuff, showed good bones, high ceilings, elegant molding, the craftsmanship of a different era. Sarah walked through the rooms, imagining what this house had been when her grandparents first bought it, when her father was young, when hope and life had filled these spaces instead of grief and clutter. She could see why they'd chosen it, why her grandmother had never been able to leave, even when it became a prison. In the kitchen, she found herself standing at the old table, now fully cleared. She ran her hand over its scarred surface, remembering dinners eaten here, homework done here, pie crust rolled out here. Good memories, she realized. Despite everything, there had been good memories. Detective Chen had stopped by earlier to check on her progress. He'd seemed impressed by the transformation, but more than that, he'd seemed genuinely moved by what Sarah had discovered. "Your grandmother left you quite a legacy," he'd said, looking at the boxes of letters and photos and mementos Sarah was keeping. Not the legacy she'd have chosen, maybe, but an important one nonetheless. "What do you mean?" Sarah had asked. "She left you the truth," he'd replied. "About mental illness, about grief, about how the people we love can be deeply flawed and still be worthy of love themselves. That's a hard truth, but an important one." Now, alone in the empty house, Sarah thought about his words. Her grandmother had indeed left her a legacy, but it wasn't just about understanding mental illness or the impact of grief. It was about the complexity of love itself. Love wasn't simple. It wasn't clean or neat or always presented in ways that were easy to accept. Love could be messy and complicated and wrapped up in pain and illness and all the ways humans are broken. But it was still love. It still mattered. It still counted. Sarah had spent 15 years being angry at her grandmother for not loving her enough. But now she understood that Maggie had loved her too much, in a way, had loved her so desperately that losing her had been another devastating loss in a lifetime of losses, one that Maggie's already fragile psyche simply couldn't process in a healthy way. The hoarding had gotten worse after Sarah left. The medical records made that clear. It was as if, with Sarah gone, Grandma Maggie had given up the fight to maintain even the small spaces of normalcy she'd been preserving. Without her granddaughter to take care of, without that daily purpose and joy, she'd retreated fully into her illness, and yet she'd kept trying. The therapy appointments, the medications, the attempts to clean, the gifts bought and wrapped for a granddaughter who wasn't there. The money saved, penny by penny, the letters written, full of love and regret and hope that someday, somehow, Sarah would understand. Sarah pulled out her phone and called Aunt Linda. Her aunt answered on the second ring, her voice warm but concerned. "Sarah, how are you holding up, honey?" "I'm okay," Sarah said, and realized she meant it. "Actually, I'm better than okay. I need to ask you something." "Of course. Anything. Why didn't you tell me about Grandma Maggie trying to contact you, about her asking for photos and updates about me?" There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Aunt Linda spoke again, her voice was heavy with old guilt. "I thought I was protecting you," she said quietly. "You were so angry when you first came to us, so hurt. You'd say you never wanted to see her again, that she'd chosen her junk over you. And you were thriving with us, Sarah. You were doing so well in school, making friends, building a normal life. I didn't want to disrupt that." "But she was trying," Sarah said, tears starting to fall again. "She was trying to get better, to stay connected. You knew that." "I did," Linda admitted. "And maybe I was wrong not to tell you, but I also saw how much pain she caused you, Sarah. Not intentionally, but the result was the same. I wanted to spare you from more of that pain." Sarah took a deep breath, trying to be fair, trying to see all sides. "Did she ever ask you to tell me she loved me?" "Every single time we spoke," Linda said. And now she was crying too. Every phone call, every letter, she always ended with, "Please tell Sarah I love her. I did tell you when you were younger, but you didn't want to hear it. After a while I stopped trying. I wish I'd known," Sarah whispered. "I wish I'd understood sooner. I know, honey. I'm so sorry. I thought I was doing the right thing, but maybe there was no right thing in this situation. Just complicated people trying their best, and sometimes getting it wrong." After they hung up, Sarah sat in the quiet house and let herself grieve, not just for her grandmother, but for all the lost time, all the misunderstandings, all the ways that love had been present, but obscured by pain and illness and well-meaning choices that caused their own harm. She grieved for the little girl she'd been, who'd needed stability and safety and couldn't find it in this house. She grieved for her grandmother, trapped in a cycle of grief and mental illness she couldn't break. She grieved for her parents, gone too soon, leaving behind such a legacy of loss. She grieved for her grandfather, who'd tried to protect his wife from the very thing that eventually consumed her. But she also felt something else beginning to grow alongside the grief: forgiveness. Not the kind that erased the hurt or pretended everything was fine, but the kind that acknowledged the full, complicated truth and chose to remember the love along with the pain. In Part 6, Breaking Free, Sarah decided to keep the house. It surprised everyone, including herself, but once she made the decision, it felt right. She hired contractors to repair the structure, to fix the sagging porch and replace the damaged windows, to address years of deferred maintenance. She had the floors refinished and the walls repainted. She updated the kitchen and bathrooms, not with expensive renovations, but with simple, clean improvements that honored the house's original character. And slowly, over the course of several months, she transformed 2847 Maple Street from a monument to grief into something new, a home, but not just any home. Sarah had an idea, one that had come to her while reading through her grandmother's therapy records, seeing how isolated she'd been, how her mental illness had cut her off from community and connection. She turned the house into a support center for people struggling with hoarding disorder and related conditions. The main floor became a meeting space where support groups could gather, where people could share their struggles without judgment, where families could learn to understand and help their loved ones. The upstairs became office space for therapists who specialized in treating hoarding disorder, OCD, and grief-related conditions. In the basement, which had been packed solid but was now clean and bright, Sarah created a memorial space. She displayed some of her grandmother's collections, not the random accumulation of newspapers, but the meaningful items. A quilt made from her great-grandmother's fabric, a display of her grandfather's woodworking tools, arranged like art, photographs spanning 4 generations, and in the center a plaque that read, "In memory of Margaret Sullivan, who loved deeply and struggled greatly. May this space help others find the healing she sought." On the walls of the memorial space, Sarah hung copies of some of her grandmother's letters, not the deeply personal ones, but excerpts that spoke to the universal experience of grief and loss and the struggle to let go. Every object was a shield against the emptiness, against the terrible possibility of forgetting. I was trying to hold on to love. I didn't know how to do it any other way. The things became a prison, but I couldn't see that until it was too late. Sarah also included educational materials about hoarding disorder, about its causes and treatments, about how it was a real illness and not a moral failing. She wanted people to understand what she'd finally learned, that mental illness is complex, that it often stems from trauma, and that judgment and shame only make it worse. The center opened on a Saturday in May, almost exactly a year after her grandmother's death. Sarah stood on the newly repaired porch, looking out at the gathering crowd. There were mental health professionals, city officials, and, most importantly, people who struggled with hoarding and their families, people who'd been isolated and ashamed and were now finding community. Aunt Linda was there, crying happy tears and squeezing Sarah's hand. "Your grandmother would be so proud," she whispered. "I hope so," Sarah said. I hope she'd understand that I'm trying to take all that pain and turn it into something that helps people. As the crowd filtered inside, Sarah found herself standing alone on the porch for a moment. She looked up at the old oak tree in the front yard, its branches now full of spring leaves, and thought about her grandmother's words. "I loved you more than all the stars in the sky." "I love you too, Grandma," Sarah said softly. "I finally understand, and I forgive you. I hope wherever you are, you can forgive yourself." A breeze rustled through the oak leaves, and for just a moment, Sarah could have sworn she smelled lavender and vanilla. Epilogue, full circle. 5 years later, Sarah sat in the garden behind the house, a garden she'd planted where there had once been piles of rotting lumber and rusted tools. It was summer, and the roses her grandmother had once tended were blooming again, brought back to life with patient care. Beside her, a little girl with dark curls played in the grass, chasing butterflies and laughing with the pure joy of a 3-year-old. Sarah watched her daughter, Margaret Rose, named after her great-grandmother, and felt her heart swell with love and hope and the fierce determination to break the cycles of the past. Inside the house, the support center was hosting its weekly meeting. Sarah could hear the murmur of voices, people sharing their struggles and victories, finding understanding and community. Over the past 5 years, they'd helped hundreds of people, some who'd gone on to successfully address their hoarding, others who were still struggling but no longer alone in their fight. The work wasn't glamorous or dramatic. Change came slowly, often in tiny increments. But it mattered. Sarah knew it mattered because people told her so, because families reunited, because isolated individuals found connection, because shame was replaced with understanding. She'd also learned that healing wasn't linear. Some days she was still angry at her grandmother for not fighting harder, for not getting help sooner, for letting mental illness steal their relationship. Other days she was angry at herself for staying away, for being too proud and hurt to reach out, for wasting the last years they could have had together. But most days she simply tried to honor her grandmother's memory by living fully, by creating the clean, beautiful spaces that Maggie couldn't, by helping others avoid the isolation and pain that had consumed her grandmother's final decades. Sarah had also reconnected with some of her grandmother's old neighbors, the ones who remembered Maggie before the hoarding became severe. They told her stories about a vibrant, warm woman who baked cookies for neighborhood children, who organized block parties, who was known for her kindness and her infectious laugh. "She was such a light," one elderly neighbor told Sarah. "And then your grandfather died, and it was like watching that light slowly dim. We tried to help, but she pushed everyone away. She was so ashamed, I think, didn't want anyone to see how she was living." These stories helped Sarah see her grandmother as a whole person, not just the hoarder who'd lost her granddaughter, but a woman who'd had a full life before tragedy struck, who'd been loved and admired, who'd contributed to her community. The hoarding had been the last chapter of her life, but it wasn't the whole story. Sarah had also come to terms with Aunt Linda's choices. She understood now that there were no villains in this story, just flawed people trying to navigate impossible situations without a clear right answer. Linda had made the choices she thought were best for Sarah. Maggie had done the same, within the constraints of her illness. Sarah herself had made choices born of hurt and youth and incomplete understanding. They'd all done the best they could. And while that best hadn't been perfect, it had been enough to get them here, to this moment of peace and purpose. "Mama!" Margaret Rose called, running over with a dandelion clutched in her small fist. "Look, I picked you a flower!" Sarah took the dandelion with solemn ceremony, tucking it behind her ear. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. Thank you." Margaret Rose climbed into her lap, warm and solid and real, and Sarah wrapped her arms around her daughter. "This," she thought, "this is what breaking free looks like. Not forgetting the past or pretending it didn't hurt, but choosing to create something different for the next generation." She would tell Margaret Rose about her great-grandmother someday, when she was old enough to understand. She would tell her about the love and the loss and the illness, about the letters and the gifts and the college funds saved penny by penny. She would teach her granddaughter's namesake about mental health and compassion and the importance of seeking help when you're struggling. But she would also tell her about the good parts, the stories told under starlight, the apple pies baked together, the lullabies hummed in the dark, because those parts were real too, and they mattered just as much as the pain. That evening, after the support group meeting ended and the last participants had left, Sarah walked through the quiet house. In the memorial room, she stood before her grandmother's photograph, a picture from before the losses mounted, showing a smiling woman with laugh lines around her eyes, holding baby Sarah's father. "I'm doing okay, Grandma," Sarah said softly. "I'm building a good life just like you wanted, and I'm helping other people find their way out of the darkness. I think you'd like that." She paused, then added, "I wish you'd gotten to meet Margaret Rose. I wish you'd gotten to see that love can be passed down through generations without all the pain attached to it. I wish you'd known that I finally understood, that I finally forgave you." Sarah reached out and touched the photograph, her fingers gentle on the glass. "But maybe you do know. Maybe wherever you are, you can see that your love wasn't wasted, that even though it was wrapped in so much pain, it still mattered. It still shaped me. It still made a difference. I love you more than all the stars in the sky," she whispered, using her grandmother's old phrase, "and I always will." That night, Sarah drove home to her own apartment across town, a small, tidy space that she could leave and return to without anxiety. That didn't hold her captive. That was a home rather than a prison. She kissed her daughter goodnight, singing the same lullaby Grandma Maggie had once sung to her, the melody carrying love and memory across the years. And when she looked out at the night sky, at the stars scattered across the darkness like diamonds on velvet, Sarah thought about her grandmother's words one more time. More than all the stars in the sky. It was true. Even when love was complicated and imperfect and wrapped up in pain, it was still there, still shining, still illuminating the darkness. Sarah finally understood that now, and understanding, she was free. The cycle of grief and loss that had consumed her grandmother's life ended with her, but the cycle of love that continued, passed down to Margaret Rose and whatever generations would come after. That was the real legacy. Not the house full of hoarded possessions, not the pain and the lost years, but the love that survived it all. And in the end, love was enough. The end. This story is dedicated to all those who struggle with mental illness, to the families who love them, and to the understanding that our worth is not determined by our ability to be perfect, but by our capacity to love and be loved in all our beautiful, broken humanity.